the cause of the universe. Dr. Slezak did not respond to my arguments on the basis of objective moral values or the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus or the immediate experience of God. All of these, I think, present a powerful cumulative case for the fact that the Christian God exists, a case which I believe is more plausible than any case that can be mounted on behalf of an atheistic worldview.
Thank you. Well, let me take up what I said I'd do, and as Dr. Craig challenged me to respond to the question of values and morals, and see if I can also deal with some of the remarks that Dr. Craig just made. In fact, perhaps we do it in reverse. Let me immediately take up one or two of the questions that he asked about. He didn't accept my challenge about the onus of proof and what it takes to establish atheism or prove atheism, and so I have to perhaps restate that a little bit more clearly. The atheist doesn't say that God does not exist categorically. This is not the claim. Therefore, it's not the case that one has to actually prove anything except in the ordinary sense in which one is entitled to be skeptical about things which you don't think exist. That's why I gave the examples of all the things which we are quite happy to be atheist or disbelievers about. Science can't give you better than that. Science can't actually categorically show that God doesn't exist. And if that's what Dr. Craig is demanding, well, atheists can't do it. Nothing in science can establish that in the whole universe. So I'm open-minded. I accept the possibility that God exists. I just need better evidence than we've had up to now. On the question of the premise, which I challenged, the question that whatever begins to exist must have a cause, I don't see that Dr. Craig has answered my challenge at all on this. He repeated the expression that this is an obvious first principle of metaphysics. But I made a fuss about saying, or at least asking the question, what are the rules for metaphysics? Where does your metaphysics come from? If it transcends science in some sense, it goes beyond the bounds of what science, which is our only reliable form of inquiry, the only things for which we have systematic and reliable beliefs. What are the rules for metaphysics? How does Dr. Craig get his metaphysical intuitions? When he asserts that things are metaphysically impossible, what's the determinant of what's metaphysically impossible? It's just what you feel? I went to some trouble to explain that one's feelings of plausibility and implausibility don't count for anything. So you can't just appeal to, and of course Dr. Craig gave lots of homely examples. He talked about horses turning up in your living room and the magician taking the rabbit out of the hat. These are precisely to beg the question. Physics is precisely a different case, and you can't make the case out from these homely examples where our ordinary conceptions of cause do work, and there we of course don't accept that something can come out of nothing. The whole point about modern physics, as Dr. Craig himself repeats when he quotes these bizarre claims of modern science, is precisely this impenetrable and unimaginable claim that the singularity, according to the standard Big Bang theory, which of course there are alternatives, but let's accept that, it actually says, and Dr. Craig and Smith have argued about this, it seems to say, and I've got this quote somewhere which I won't look for now, where Smith goes into poetic raptures about how dizzying the whole concept is that you might have come out of nothing. It's certainly incomprehensible, but I don't think Dr. Craig and I disagree on the claim that this is what the science says. And my question is, when you go beyond science, what's the rationale and the justification for going beyond what science says? If the physics is wrong, then you can talk about other things. But currently, it seems to me we're forced to accept that. Well, let me talk a little bit about the questions of meaning and value. Dr. Craig thinks that if there's no God, then you have no basis for saying that rape or murder is really morally wrong. He said on the atheistic view, if you explain morality in other ways, as he quoted from Roos, the philosopher of biology, for example, if it's just a matter of social consequences, if you escape the social consequences, then he says there's nothing really wrong with raping someone, or there's nothing really wrong with the Holocaust. Now this is extremely misleading, and it's a kind of a trick, it's a play on words. For the atheist and the person like Roos, who doesn't believe that there's a transcendent basis for morality in God's commands, it's not fair to charge them, or seemingly charge them, with thinking that rape is all right. That's how Dr. Craig seems to present it, and that's misleading and an inappropriate way to capture what's going on. The point here is that we can share Dr. Craig's intuition, I think, as with the unimaginability of the Big Bang. One does have some kind of instinct that if there's not a God or some transcendent being to give the commands, then ethics seems to lack a basis. If it's just based on human life and perhaps evolution or other social bases. In other words, God's commands or some cosmically transcendent status of our rules of conduct are not the only basis for genuine, real, objective moral values, although we may naively, intuitively think so. In any case, it seems to me that that's all you can get without independent grounds for thinking that God exists. How does Dr. Craig in this case establish that there are absolute moral values? It's a bit like the rabbit out of the hat and the horse that's in your dining room. He needs to get this claim to make his argument work, but he establishes that there are these transcendent absolute moral values by asking you. He appeals to what you really know, and he says, we all know that rape is really wrong. Well, yes, and we all agree, independently of what you think your ethics is based on. As philosophers say, your meta-ethics could be something other than God said so. And that still gives you the justification for saying that rape is really wrong. So Dr. Craig's appeal only shows that we all think that there are certain values, and emphatically not that they're cosmically absolute and beyond all pure human experience and preferences or perhaps innate endowments biologically. All he's actually shown is that we have strong moral intuitions. Certainly not that these judgments depend on being absolute, whatever that may mean. So again, to repeat, the evidence of our firm commitments to certain values is consistent with lots of other grounds for their justification. And for better or for worse, there's no escaping the fact that there's actually some considerable degree of variability in moral judgments within societies and certainly between them. So whose firm judgments are to count as the really real absolute ones? You may think God told you, but so do my friends the Aztecs, who cut people's hearts out to make sure the sun comes up each day. So moral values don't have some kind of cosmic status external to all human life and thought. Indeed, if the only basis for moral judgments is that God said so, this may be seen as a diminished, less dignified view of values, since they're not based on reason, just blind obedience to some unfathomable authority. I think myself better a morality which is derived from rational considerations and human sentiments of justice, fairness, compassion, equality, and above all, human happiness. I'd suggest that these are a foundation for moral values, even if they don't exist in the Andromeda galaxy. I don't think one can do better than my favourite atheist, Bertrand Russell, who said, the good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. In any case, I think that's all you're likely to get. Well, I've got 5 more minutes. Perhaps I can make a quick analogy. There's a close analogy in the case of linguistics, I think. We share very strong intuitions about what's correct and incorrect in our use of our native tongue. If a child says he goed to the beach, we know this is wrong. We all know the rules of our language, and we have absolutely clear judgments about these, but the objectivity of these judgments doesn't mean that they're absolute in any sense. We hardly need God to explain why we all speak English correctly and know what's right and wrong. Now, I know that lapses of grammar are not the same as moral lapses, despite what some school teachers think. But the analogy is quite close. The reality and the force of the moral precepts or the judgments don't tell you their basis or origin in either case. Let me say something about Jesus and miracles. Like the argument from design, the arguments from the biblical miracles I don't think have improved since David Hume's trenchant criticisms of the 18th century. For example, I don't have to doubt the historicity of Jesus or the evidence of the Bible as such, though there's plenty of room for ordinary non-theistic historical dispute. Let's say the Channel 9 60 Minutes team, or better perhaps the ABC Four Corners team, was actually there and did a documentary. It's all on tape, the crucifixion, the cave with the missing person, and interviews with the witnesses and all that. So let's say that it's not a 2,000-year story that's handed down, but a first-hand documentary. You still shouldn't believe the story of the Bible, and Dr. Craig made a point about the empty cave, even if it were a live report where the facts are not in doubt. It's not the facts, but the interpretation or explanation of the facts which are in dispute. Are they best explained by miracles or in some other way? Dr. Craig evidently can't think of any other more plausible way to explain the empty cave besides a miraculous one. I can think of lots. He wasn't really dead, he was just feeling a bit sick. And some friends got him out of the cave when no one was looking. Now, you're not expected to like that answer, but the point is it doesn't matter if you don't like that